the Old Opera House, the second in our series of oral history forums, The Living History of Pulaski County. I'm Karen Bailey, Director of Downtown Development in our Better Hometown program here for the city and also for Historic Preservation Commission with the City of Hawkinsville. I want to make some important meetings and upcoming events that will also be held here in the Opera House in the near future. And let me just say at this time, would everyone please turn their cell phones off as a courtesy to our special guests. And also tonight's program is being videoed and recorded. So if you would take a moment to do that. I have a couple of announcements. The first is our next meeting of the Pulaski Historical Commission. That meeting will be held here in the Opera House on Thursday, February the 22nd at 6:30 p.m. upstairs in the Kimberly Room. This will be an important meeting where we'll discuss the future of our museum project, and we'll also at that time select our officers. So if you've been involved in the past two meetings where we have revived this commission, please come, and if you haven't before and would like to join this group, please come on February the 22nd at 6:30. Next, I'd like to say that the next oral history forum that we will host here at the Opera House will take place on Tuesday, May the 1st at 7 o'clock p.m. right here in the same auditorium. And also, if you'll notice on the back page of your program, you'll see an order form for DVDs of the first and tonight's second forums. There will be a volunteer to help you, if you so choose, to order a DVD. There will be a table located out in the foyer after tonight's presentations. And we just want to let you know that there will also be a beautiful display on loan from ComSouth that you can view in the Kimberly Room as you exit the program tonight. As you exit out the back doors, take the stairs up to your right and head on into the Kimberly Room so that you can see that beautiful display. You've also got comment cards that were made available to you when you came in. Those are for your comments and for questions, which will be held after both presentations, and also for any suggestions for us for future forums that you would like to for us to consider. We would love to hear your suggestions. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Mr. Tom Boot Hunt, who will serve as our moderator for this program this evening. Tom is a member of our Pulaski Historical Commission, who has a strong interest in preservation. Tom was born in neighboring Wilcox County, and he has lived in Houston County and in Atlanta. He came to Pulaski County to be near his childhood roots, where he lives with his wife, Karen. They are actively restoring their farmstead, and they are both very active as volunteers in our community. We are so fortunate to have them here in Hawkinsville now. So ladies and gentlemen, if you will help me to welcome Mr. Tom Hunt.
Thank you very much, Karen. I've been really excited about having these oral history forums. Of course, history obviously is important to all of us, and in my case, obviously, it seems a lot more important and a lot more interesting now at my age than it did when I was studying American history and world history and having to take tests on them years ago. Oral history and the capturing of oral history in forums like this and through a taped medium, in this particular case DVD, has become more and more popular in recent years as the technology and all has advanced. And having taken a look at the first DVD that Mike Newman produced, it really is a good way to go back and think about and dwell on some of the things that were brought up in the first of this series of forums back last year. And I think as we go forward tonight, it'll be a great way to capture this as well, as we deal with and dwell on and look at a little bit more depth later in terms of what Dr. Coleman has to say and what Mansfield has to say. One thing that I might add about the format of the DVD that Mike has produced is that he has got labeled chapters and so forth, and has all the features where you can advance to this or that or whatever. So it really is easy to use, and I would encourage you to think about getting that. This is the second, as Karen Bailey mentioned, in a series of these forums, the other one being scheduled in May. And I think that we owe, well really I don't think, I know that we owe Karen Bailey a great deal of gratitude and thanks for all that she's done, not only for Hawkinsville and Pulaski County generally, but specifically as it relates to what's going on from a Better Hometown standpoint, and the reestablishment of the Historical Commission, and just all that she does. And obviously she's been instrumental in planning for and putting on these forums. I'd like to also thank Karen Hunt, who, I'd particularly like to thank her, my wife, who was instrumental in sort of planting the seed and the idea for doing these. So to Karen and to Karen, thank you on behalf of all of us and on behalf of the community. Tonight, we're really privileged to have two real stewards of historic preservation in this area. Not only two outstanding stewards of historic preservation, but two outstanding individuals and people, obviously, who in their lives have not only committed those lives and their efforts to their chosen profession, but on the other hand, who have reached out to the community and really who have just done so many things for other people. I guess I was exposed to years ago the saying that the world is full of givers and takers, and it seems in a lot of cases there are a lot more takers than they are givers. But these two people here have given of themselves so much over the years to others and to this community, and really to efforts statewide. And for that, we are appreciative, and we're really excited and thrilled and thankful to be able to have them here tonight, and for them to take the time to share the thoughts and the comments that they have. The format is relatively simple, as Karen mentioned. We have the two presenters. Dr. Coleman will go first, and then Mansfield will follow him. And while these cards have been passed out either for comments or for questions following the two presenters, obviously there will be time for dialogue so that there can be interaction not only among those here in the audience, but with Dr. Coleman and Mansfield as well. We want it to be an enjoyable, informative evening, and you can contribute to that with your participation as the evening unfolds. These two gentlemen, obviously are no strangers to you. I have known of Mansfield for many years, going back to my previous life. But in the case of Dr. Coleman, I didn't meet him until coming to Hawkinsville back in 2003. Dr. Coleman, in many ways, an institution in this area and in this community. He was born in Graymont in Emanuel County, attended public schools there, and graduated from ECI Emanuel County Institute. He did his college work at North Georgia College, and completed his medical training at the Medical College of Georgia in 1951. Between the time that he was at North Georgia and the time that he completed medical school at in Augusta, he was in the Army from 1945, actually 45 and 46, and served in the Pacific Theater, in the infantry, in the Signal Corps, and served with General Douglas MacArthur, General Headquarters, as a telegrapher and radio teletype operator in Tokyo, in the early occupation of that country. And I realize that today, as we look back more and more, we owe even more debt and gratitude to folks like Dr. Coleman, who served that time in the military and allowed us to enjoy so many of the freedoms that we enjoy today. Upon completion of school at Medical College of Georgia, he spent 40 years as a doctor here in Hawkinsville. And he's a member of numerous professional organizations, as you would expect someone like that to be associated with his profession. But he's been an untiring volunteer here in Hawkinsville and Pulaski County over the years. And a lot of the biographical information there is in the program, and I won't repeat that. But one of the things that I found interesting about Dr. Coleman is his interest in music and music performance. And he's well known and widely known beyond just Hawkinsville. I recently had some surgery and had to have physical therapy after that. And as a lady in Atlanta, one of the first things that she mentioned is we talked about where we were from and interest. She mentioned that she had been involved in playing the dulcimer in some musical groups in which Dr. Coleman was instrumental in putting together. So at any rate, at this point, I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Coleman and have him share with us whatever he would want to share. We'll talk a lot about the Taylor family and Taylor Memorial Hospital, but he's not limited to that. So with that, Dr. Coleman, looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Tom. I'm really privileged to be able to talk to you about a subject that I happen to know something about, both from some research I've done on the Taylor family and from my experience at the Taylor Memorial Hospital. When I speak of the Taylor Memorial Hospital, I'm primarily speaking of the old hospital, as we did change the name of the hospital to Taylor Regional Hospital in, I believe, 1979. In order to talk or to explain about how we came to have such a great hospital in Hawkinsville, it's almost mandatory that we talk some about the Taylor family. And the history of the Taylor family history in Hawkinsville and the contributions they made are very wide. And the family history is very interesting. And I certainly don't know all of it by any means, but I do have enough to connect the dots with our having this great hospital. As you all know, this hospital was given as a gift to the community by Mr. Taylor, who was Robert Jenks Taylor. He dedicated this hospital and gave the gift in memory of his grandfather and his father. And it is there where I would like to start and say a little bit about them. Before that, I'm going to say a couple of words about the geography back in those days. And many of you know a lot of this already, but I would like to repeat some of it. Pulaski County was carved out of Lawrence County in 1808. It had been part of the Creole Confederacy extending from Macon to Hartford. And Hartford was established as a town in 1811. It was named for Nancy Hart. Long Street is the name of given to the Pulaski County east of the river, which was an old stagecoach route from Milledgeville to Hartford. A very prominent planter in Long Street was named Mr. Ezekiel Taylor. He was a businessman, a planter, and also commissioner of roads for Pulaski County. In 1798, Robert Newsom Taylor, a distant cousin of Mr. Ezekiel Taylor, graduated from the College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York, and he graduated in 1883. He had he was very interested in infectious disease, in particular malaria. He knew of his cousin down in Georgia, and he felt that he might come down here and practice medicine for a while and learn something about malaria, because he had heard that the malaria was rampant in this part of the country. He did come south, and he lived with his cousin. This was a distant cousin, Ezekiel Taylor. He did start his medical practice here, and he eventually married Ezekiel Taylor's 15-year-old daughter. Her name was Louisa Maria Taylor. And he built a grand house for her in Hartford, and it was called Taylor Hall. And that's the same Taylor Hall that we know of in Hawkinsville today. His first child was Ezekiel Henry Taylor, who was born in 1826. They also had other children, but several died at very young ages. In addition to the medical practice, Dr. Taylor was a prominent farmer and also a businessman. Hartford was a very thriving business community with churches and businesses of all sorts, and the courthouse was over there for Pulaski County. At some time, it was decided that the malaria was less of a problem on the west side of the river than it was on the east side of the river. So having that fact presented, the whole town decided to move west of the river. And they did. They moved over the Okmulgee to where Hawkinsville is today. This led to the establishment of the city of Hawkinsville in 1836. The courthouse and businesses and all of that were also moved across the river to where we are today. Dr. Robert Newsom Taylor became the first mayor of the new city of Hawkinsville. His son, Ezekiel Taylor, then grew up in Hawkinsville and began to study medicine with his father in his teens. Dr. Taylor was an adventurous person and took his son to California after the California Gold Rush. They had quite an adventure there, the details of which are scant, but they eventually came back home. Dr. Ezekiel Taylor then went to the University of New York and received his medical degree in 1853. He returned to Hawkinsville to practice. His father, Dr. Robert Newsom Taylor, died in 1852. Now, these two men were the father and the grandfather of Mr. R.J. Taylor, who gave us our hospital. Ezekiel Taylor married Sarah Elizabeth Stone in 1853. Their first child was Robert Jenks Taylor, the same gentleman we are talking about. Mr. Robert R.J. Taylor was born June 15, 1854. Dr. Ezekiel Taylor, when Robert was about 6 years old, moved his family to Mitchell County. His wife had inherited vast farmlands there, and they went down to manage those after the death of her parents. He practiced medicine there, and R.J. Taylor grew up on the farms, developed a strong work ethic, and he had private tutors. He never went to college, but he had private tutors and became a very busy young man. When he was 8, he was always interested in the medicine part of his father's medical practice, and he was interested in the drugs and the chemistry of those drugs. And he jumped at the chance when he had an uncle he had in Hawkinsville named Gus, invited him to come up and work in the drugstore. He did that when he was 18 years of age. So he had returned to Hawkinsville, and it was there that he met his lifelong friend, Eli Good, who was also a clerk in the drugstore. R.J. Taylor developed as I say, a keen work ethic and was involved in numerous businesses. He had a grocery store in Hawkinsville at one time, and the most successful side business he had was in the fertilizer business. When he was 35 years old, the fertilizer business was thriving, and he elected to move to Macon because that's where he had to do most of his business. That business later became the Southern Phosphate Works. The drugstore in Hawkinsville was then sold to Eli Good, Sam Way, and Mr. J.O. Jeffs. It eventually became Need Goods drugstore, and that store was in business until 1962. It went out of business after 85 years. Mr. Taylor married Fanny Dillard of Hawkinsville in 1876. He had 2 daughters and 2 sons. The daughters survived, the 2 sons died, and his wife Fanny died in childbirth of the second son. In 1886, he married Mary Frances Pate. She died in 1889, and they had no children. In 1891, after he had moved to Macon, he married Kathleen DeWitt. Kathleen DeWitt he had known in Hawkinsville when she was younger because her mother ran a small hotel here. They eventually had 7 children over the many years and lived in Macon. He became quite prosperous in Macon, making a lot of money, and he was very important to the city of Macon in its activities after the Civil War. He had a wholesale drugs business, which was the largest wholesale drug business in the Southeast. He also was involved in banking, insurance, and other activities. He never forgot his roots in Hawkinsville, but Macon is now where he was, and he lived the rest of his life there and died there. He built a large home there. If anybody knows where the Vineville Methodist Church is, if you stand in front of that church, to your right is a large building, large house, and that's where he lived and raised his children. They were very active in the Vineville Methodist Church. There is a wonderful book written by his friend, Mr. Eugene Anderson, called Financial Hero, that describes all the activities he had in Macon and how important he was for that city. Eli Good and Harley Lawson were special friends of his, and he confided in them. He often visited Hawkinsville, and he confided in them that he would like to give a gift to the city of Hawkinsville and Pulaski County in memory of his father and grandfather. Together, they decided that a hospital might be a good idea. He wanted to remain anonymous about it, and they advertised in the newspaper, Hawkinsville Dispatch and News, in March of 1937 for comments from the public. These comments were very, very positive, and it was felt that that is exactly what he wanted to do. He still remained anonymous at this point. He gave an initial gift of $50,000 in securities. This happened to be Coca-Cola stock. Mr. Taylor established some preconditions about his gift. He would pick the site for the hospital. He would make charge. He would select furnishings and equipment. He would name the hospital. And he required that a self-perpetuating 7-member board be selected by the people. Those were his preconditions. The early organization was very interesting. On April 1st, 1937, a mass meeting was held at the courthouse in Hawkinsville. Presiding was J.H. Thompson, who at that time was Pulaski County Chamber of Commerce president. Elizabeth Mooney was the recording secretary. Mr. Harley Lawson read a letter from Mr. Taylor that had been sent to him, and I would like to read that for you. This is Mr. Taylor's words. While this was meant to be presented at this meeting, while it had been my desire to make this gift to the people of Hawkinsville and Pulaski County, I did not wish to make a gift that was neither needed nor wanted. I therefore made use of your services to ascertain public sentiment and request in that doing so you not disclose my name. Having now become convinced that there is a need for the hospital and that the people of Hawkinsville and Pulaski County want it, I now release you from your pledge of secrecy. A nominating committee was appointed on the spot at that meeting, and to appoint the 7 members of the Board of Trustees. And these were all friends of Mr. Taylor. He wasn't here, but I have to assume that he had some way of getting the word out that these men would be the first Board of Trustees. They were Mr. Harley Lawson, Robert S. Anderson, John B. Delamar, Nick Caviro, Willie N. Pate, J.F. Lee, and J.H. Thompson. Mr. Harley Lawson was elected that day as chairman of the Board of Trustees. A petition was granted for the incorporation of the hospital in May of 1937. The site was picked by a small committee from the Board of Trustees, although Mr. Taylor had already decided where he wanted it. And that site was where the old hospital is now, and it was the family home of a cousin of Mr. Taylor's, Miss Ruth Benbury. They paid $6,000 for that lot. A construction bid was, after the designs were in, the construction bid was won by Fisk Carter Construction Company of Greenville, South Carolina. The total cost estimated at this point was going to be $81,000 for the entire package. This included the subcontractors for plumbing and electricity and other things. Construction began in August of 1937. Mr. Taylor's original gift was $50,000 in those securities, but he had now brought his gift up to $84,000 in Coca-Cola stock. In January of 1938, the local physicians met to form a medical staff. They were Dr. Eugene Brown, Dr. A.R. Bush, Dr. J.M. Horn, who had been practicing in the area, in the Finlayson area, for some 37 years and was well known. He was the grandfather of Ronnie Fleeman. Dr. E.T. Newsom, he was listed in that original group, but I cannot find any evidence that he ever actually practiced in the hospital. And the final one was Dr. Augustus Batts. Dr. Batts had opened his office the previous year in Hawkinsville, and that was 1937. Later on, Dr. A.E. Bird Daniel, who was Hugh Lawson's uncle, came in as a surgeon, and also Dr. Harry Moses from Macon was on the staff. He came down occasionally and did some surgery. There was a public house, public visitation to an open house rather, on February 13, 1938 for the public. The hospital was not quite ready, but there was refreshments and all of that sort of thing, and was written up in the newspapers. A public announcement was made that the opening date of the hospital would be June the 15th, 1938, which was Mr. Taylor's 84th birthday. It was announced that Naomi Zutrower would be nursing director, but she wore many hats. She also was the laboratory technician, she was the x-ray technician, and anything else that needed to be done. On June the 15th, the celebration began. The city was excited. They had a band up from Eastman. Governor Ed Rivers was invited, but he declined due to previous engagements. There were many people here from Macon, and it said that there were about 500 people at this first day. Mr. Taylor did not like to make public speeches. He was here, but he did not speak at that event. Rather than his speaking, his son-in-law, Mr. Orville Parks of Macon, did the presentation to the Board of Trustees. Mr. Harley Lawson accepted on the behalf of the Board of Trustees. Reverend E.D. Collins made acceptance on behalf of the community. There was a following barbecue out at the Country Club, which is now Pine Level Drive, and that cost $1 per ticket. Mr. Taylor died November the 30th, 1939, the very next year. The exact date of admission and the name of the first patient in the hospital is not documented. I've researched that and cannot find that at all. An interesting publication at that time was what the charges were in the hospital. A private room with a bath was $6 a day. Private room without a bath was $5 a day. Ward beds were $3 a day. There was a special fee for tonsillectomy, including the operating room and 24-hour stay in the hospital. That was $15. Obstetric special was $35, which was included 1 week in the hospital. Cotton mill patients had a special fee, and that they could come to the hospital for $15 per week. War times soon followed, as you all know, in 1941, when World War II started. Things slowed down a lot at the Taylor Hospital, and there are very little records for that time. One must assume that supplies and medications were hard to come by, and we do know that Dr. Bush and Dr. Batts were the only real active physicians here during those years. The hospital certainly had plenty of empty space, I think, in those days, because they rented space to Pulaski County Health Department for their activities in the hospital, and also Dr. T.L. Underwood, a new dentist who had just come to town, rented space in the hospital. In 1943, Ms. Zutrower resigned for reasons unknown. Ms. Lois Brunson was appointed temporary superintendent. This is the first time her name appears in any of the records that I can find. She was from the Statesboro area and had worked down in Bullitt County and in Milledgeville for some time. Later on, she would also leave for a short time, but then eventually came back to the hospital. I do not know what year, because that's not documented, and then she remained here until, and worked in the hospital until she retired, and she lived here and died quite a few years ago. Mr. Harley Lawson, who was chairman of the Board of Trustees, died in 1944. In the post-war era, things began to change at the hospital. Through the efforts of Dr. Bush, Dr. Bush had graduated from Emory. He was originally from Eastman, Georgia, but he graduated from Emory Medical School, and he had been in Hawkinsville for a number of years. Dr. William Roosevelt Baker had been, had all of his surgical training at Gray Hospital in Atlanta and through the Emory Medical School. And he was brought here in 1946 by Dr. Bush. Dr. Baker had been a field surgeon in the Pacific Theater during World War II and had vast experience in the field of trauma. And he had trained in all disciplines as surgeons were trained in the days that he was at Emory and Grady. In 1948, Dr. M.F. Arnold, who was a native of Macon, came. Dr. Bush left in 1952 after 27 years of practice in Hawkinsville. He went to the Veterans Hospital in Dublin to finish his career. He worked as a staff physician there. Because of his leaving, I was recruited from Macon and came to Hawkinsville in 1953. And in 1955, Dr. Hart Sylvester came to this community. When they recruited me from Macon, there was no office space here. Dr. Baker and Dr. Arnold both had office space in the hospital, but there was no other office space available. They had been, meaning the Board of Trustees, had investigated and was planning to eventually build again. And with my agreement to come here, they elected to build what later was called the East Wing of the hospital, which had physicians' offices on the ground floor. And they stuck to their promise, and I came in July of 1953, and they started that building on that summer. They finished it the next year. A dedication was held in 1954, at which time the widow of Mr. R.J. Taylor, Miss Katie DeWitt Taylor, came down, and there was a grand banquet at the Old Brown Hotel. There were now 5 physicians on the staff. The hospital was a full-service hospital with lots of obstetrics and lots of surgery. If you will remember, at this time, there were no surrounding hospitals. Taylor Memorial Hospital was indeed a regional hospital. There was no hospital in Perry, there was none in Cordele, there was none in the surrounding towns, none in Cochrane, none in Eastman. There were some small clinics, but there were no hospitals. And so the patients came from numerous surrounding counties. It was always very busy. The hospital was very busy and always full. Often there was a waiting list to get in, even for very sick patients. We had patients in the hallways, which we could not have now due to regulations. Surgery was done 6 days a week, and often we did surgery on Sunday afternoon. Surgery was usually started at 5:30 in the morning, particularly in the summertime, as we had no air conditioning in the operating rooms. Modern anesthesia, radiology, and pathology would not come to us until the mid-1960s. We had our own in-house blood bank. If a surgical procedure was going to be done and it was anticipated that blood might be needed, people would be called in to be matched, and we would draw blood in advance and keep it and use it as we needed it. Those with rare blood types we held out, and we had names of numerous people who were on those lists. We could call them, and we had a very good working, what we used to call a walking blood bank. Red Cross blood system didn't come to us to the mid-1970s, I believe. Mrs. Brunson was not called director of nurses at this time. She was called the superintendent of the hospital, and indeed she was in charge of all activities. She really wanted to do mostly clinical work, but it was mandated that she do all these other things, like buying supplies and all, just everything that you can think of in the hospital. Ms. Brunson had her hand in. Various board members micromanaged some of this, but Mrs. Brunson was ultimately in charge. In 1962, the third floor of the south wing of the hospital was added to provide more rooms for obstetrics and a newborn nursery. Dennis and Dennis, the original architects, designed this, and the roof was taken off, and the design was made so that it appeared that it was redone just like the remainder of the building. The final building was made with the west wing, which was needed because we needed some more semi-private rooms. The board decided not to engage the architect at that time, and one of the board members sort of designed that west wing, and this was built in 1963. He did not. He put a flat roof on this, which made it look sort of tacked on, and I've always been upset about the way that looked as compared to the other part of the building. The mid-1960s and early 1970s became very difficult times for the hospital. First of all, there was no professional management. Despite the good intentions of the board, they had no planning or vision for the future. Medical staff was extremely busy given the regional nature of our practices. It was impossible to recruit for several reasons, and one of which was the aging facility compared to new hospitals around us. This was made possible by the passage of the Hill-Burton Act in 1946, and the hospital construction part of that act was passed in 1949. Many new facilities were being built in our neighboring counties. Almost any county with some effort could get a hospital. The Blakely County Hospital opened in 1969. This was a blow to the Taylor Memorial Hospital because many of the patients came from Blakely County. The Medicare Act was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson in July 1964 as an amendment to the Social Security Act of 1935. This event would drastically change the whole medical system. Hospitals were automatically brought into the system on declaration of their compliance with the rules and regulations with Medicare and with verification by federal agencies. Then the board made a surprising move. With no consultation or input from the medical staff, they informed the staff and the public that they would not participate in the federal program. The reason given was they did not want the federal government regulating the hospital, and that the board was unwilling to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which would require that the hospital be totally integrated in racial issues. This put the physicians in a bind trying to care for our patients, as many of them were not Medicare eligible and were looking for facilities that could accommodate that. The patients began to use other facilities, and after many months of losing patients and financial losses, the board realized that they made a bad mistake and applied to Medicare for admission to the Medicare program. Whereas it would have been automatic originally, it now required a long process of inspection and bringing up to the standards that Medicare required. This brought in a myriad of state and federal agencies for inspections and of all activities that went on in the hospital, not just the integration. The medical staff and Mrs. Brunson had been working for some time to become accredited by the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals. In those days, we had been told by Medicare and by major insurance companies that one would have to be accredited by the Joint Commission in order to participate in those programs. This later on proved to be it never happened. But at any rate, we did work very hard to get accredited, and in 1968 we got that certificate of accreditation and have been certified since that time. As I say, due to poor management, or no management, no professional management, loss of patients, financial losses, and the other part of the difficulty was the pressures from state and federal agencies about the physical plant itself. There were numerous problems. Number one, there were no rooms in the hospital that met standards as far as square footage. The doorways were all not up to standard. There was wood furniture all in the hospital, although it was very attractive. They had an outdated elevator, and it was mandated that two elevators needed to be in the building. There was no sprinkler system, although that building is probably as fireproof as anything can be without a sprinkler system, and many other problems that the hospital was being, and the board was being constantly harassed about from the various agencies. This brought on surveys by numerous engineering firms to see what could be done about all of this. And I don't know just how many firms came in, but off and on over years, quite a few did. And every one of them said that they could build a new hospital much cheaper than they could try to remodel this. Plus, there was no space for parking very much, no space for growth. Many of us felt at that time that the hospital would not survive and would probably close. Two of the doctors were thinking about relocating to other towns. Dr. Baker was doing more surgery in Cochrane and Vienna. In the early 1970s, the picture began to change. Due to the deaths of some and resignations of others, some new members came on the board who felt that the hospital could be saved and that they did not want to give up on it. They soon agreed that the hospital, this plant, could not be saved, but the hospital itself could be saved by going to a new facility. To mention a few names, there were people like Stuart Duggan, Bill Polk, Malcolm Nelson, Mansfield Jennings Jr., Marilyn Way, and number one that came on. There was great public outcry when it was announced that we were going to build a new hospital. No one wanted to lose this hospital, to move this hospital away from where it was. But it was mandatory, and the board bit the bullet and went ahead with it. Hiri architectural firm designed the hospital. Kilos Construction Company got the contract, and they started building in early 1975. Mr. Dan Maddock was brought here in 1976, first as a consultant, and then later as by the way, he had had extensive training in hospital administration, and he was brought here as a consultant, but was later brought in as hospital administrator. The hospital was completed, although there were problems along the way, and we moved into the new facility on February 11, 1976, after some 40 years at the old site. As I said before, the name changed came in 1979. It's not, I don't want to get into talk about the new hospital, but I would like to say a few words about it, just a few facts. Our new hospital now is the largest private employer in Pulaski County. We have 575 employees. Payroll is over $20 million per year. The gross billing is $70 million a year, but only 50%, net is only 50% of billing. 68% of the patients in the area are Medicare and Medicaid. In 1998, Taylor Healthcare Group was formed. That includes Taylor Regional Hospital and Bleckley Memorial Hospitals, which the Taylor Healthcare Group manages. Have a home health care agency, a durable medical equipment company, outreach clinics in Cochran, Vienna, Unadilla, Eastman, Rochelle, and Kathleen. We are on a 90-acre campus. The Taylor Regional Hospital was selected Rural Hospital of the Year twice by the Georgia Hospital Association in recent years. The Dan S. Maddox Cancer Treatment Center opened in 2002 in partnership with the Atlanta Oncology Associates for radiation and medical oncology. And as you all know, the Wellness Center has been built and is widely used by the community at this time. I'd like to close with reading you a statement that appeared in the Hawkinsville Dispatch and News in December of 1937. It was in the form of a letter to the general public from Mr. R.J. Taylor. For a long time it had been my desire to erect some kind of memorial to my father and grandfather, and to do something for the community in which I was born and which I received my start in life. The giving of the hospital and having some little part in an advisory way in its construction has given me a great deal of pleasure. I realize that a hospital is more than a building, no matter how well adapted to the purpose and how well equipped. I feel that you are going to make the hospital a real institution which will be a credit to the community, which will administer to its needs, and which will provide a lasting benefit. This is what I had hoped, and this is the purpose for which I gave it. Thank you.
The next presenter obviously is no